And welcome back to the Cool Jets podcast. Where it's Ben Blessington and Michael Nania. Well, Michael, Jets OTAs are in the books. Robert Saleh calling practice a little early. Fortunately, the Jets do come back sooner than most teams because they're playing that Hall of Fame game. So about 40 days or so until the Jets are back reported for training camp. So we're officially in the no man's land of the NFL offseason. But don't worry, we have plenty of content. We have a number of interviews coming out this week with a few players who can give us their impressions of Saleh and OTAs thus far. This podcast, we're going to be doing our stat predictions for the offense. Michael's done a few articles for Jets X Factor, kind of laying out what he expects from the receivers. We'll get into the quarterbacks, running backs, and then we'll have another episode later on about the defense. But first, Michael, before we get into the stat stuff, a few storylines from OTAs we want to touch on. Dalvin Cook, released by the Minnesota Vikings. I think our last episode, I got to have my chance on the soapbox and say why the Jets shouldn't sign DeAndre Hopkins. I have to say that take has aged relatively well, considering hasn't signed anywhere within 2 weeks. It seems like a lot of the NFL was seeing what we were seeing when watching the tape. Cook gets released. A lot of Jets fans see a big name, want the Jets to pursue him. I saw you had an article this week saying why the Jets should not sign Dalvin Cook. So, Michael, instead of asking you how you are, it's your turn. Why should the Jets not sign Dalvin Cook?
Well, for me, I think it's a lot of the same reasons behind why you didn't think they should sign Hopkins. I think it's another example of, like you said, a big name becomes available and, Jets are going for a Super Bowl chasing kind of season. So you want every big name. You want to stockpile as much depth and talent on the roster as you can. But I just look at what Cook did last year, and he really wasn't the same player that I think people know him as. He fumbled the ball a lot, and he's done that for a few years now. So he fumbles a lot. His drops are really high. And in terms of the rushing, I think he just stockpiled numbers on a lot of carries. If you look at his efficiency in terms of some of the more advanced metrics like DVOA, EPA, all that stuff, rushing yards over expected, all those things, he was near the bottom in the majority of those. And that's with the Vikings offensive line that ranked pretty high in most run blocking categories. So they were third best in terms of PFF's run blocking grades. But, take that for what it's worth. But it was seen as at least an average to good offensive line. And he was one of the more inefficient rushers in the league in terms of the more advanced categories. I mean, his yards per carry was pretty good, but he is sort of a home run hitter kind of guy, which, has appeal. So I think that knocked it up a little bit, but he is going to be 28 this year. And with running backs, I just like to be on the front end with running backs. I'd rather have a running back whose time is coming more so than one who's, had his peak already. And, I know he would not be coming in to be the guy, and, the mileage would be lower and all of that, but he's also had durability issues throughout his career. He's missed multiple games in 5 out of 6 seasons. So for me, he's just not the type of guy I would want in my committee backfield. A guy who fumbles a lot. He's the most fumbles among all running backs over the last 3 years. He's the third most drops among running backs over the past 3 years. That's past 4 years, actually. Past 4 years, that's a pretty good body of work. He's the most most fumbles and third most drops. So I just don't want that with the committee guy. I know he can hit home runs every now and then, but to have that fumble risk, like remember when Michael Carter fumbles that game away against the Bills? Like that's so frustrating when a guy isn't playing enough to really take over the game and make up for that kind of mistake, but can still make a mistake that crushes your entire game. I don't want fumble risk in my, backup running backs, nor do I want him dropping passes from Aaron Rodgers because he does like to target his running backs in the flat a lot. So there's my argument for going against Dalvin Cook. As you can tell, I'm pretty strongly against it. And go ahead and quote me on this. I'll eat my words if I'm wrong. I will definitely look back on this take and own it. I hope he signs with the Dolphins.
Oh,
go
okay.
Ahead.
I was gonna say, watch Cook sign with the Dolphins, Hopkins go to the Pats, and then both their takes aging like milk come the fall. But I feel pretty good about
it. We're willing to own our bad takes. So
that's true. 100 reasons to believe in Sam Darnold.
Write it down. Give yourself a notification, a reminder, whatever it is, and we'll come back if DeAndre Hopkins scorches the Jets, Cook scorches the Jets. But I feel confident. I'm not as anti-Hopkins as you, but for Cook, I'll definitely drive the anti-Cook train. I hope the Dolphins sign him, and the Jets can
Really?
benefit from that Black Friday fumble.
Okay. I mean, I guess to play devil's advocate on Cook, it is a win now year. The Jets do have a good amount of cap space. Granted, a lot of that is going to go to Quinnen and Aaron Rodgers, assumed with the restructure, but they do have enough space for one more big move. And it does seem like the Jets are going all in on this year. Cook is a home run hitter. He is still a talented player. Yes, he's turning 28, but it's not like he's in his 30s. He's 27 as a running back, so he's still in his prime. He's still a good player, and he would take pressure off of Rodgers. I agree with you. I don't think I would do it, especially for the money it sounds like he'll command. But is there a line where if it's like, okay, you could get Cook for $7 million a year, would you do it, or is there just no chance you're bringing in Dalvin Cook? It sounds like you're pretty happy with the Jets running back depth behind Brees. I mean, he is coming off of an ACL. We saw it with Barkley. There can be a little bit of a delay in terms of the success he could have early in the season. It could be nice to have somebody else. The other thing to keep in mind is in terms of the Jets' interest, there was a lot of smoke about the Jets being interested in Jahmyr Gibbs in the NFL draft. There was smoke about them being interested in Jamal Williams in free agency. It's tough to prove the validity of those claims, but it does seem like the Jets have been kind of sniffing around that running back market. And as opposed to when reporters asked Saleh about DeAndre Hopkins and he said, they're happy with the receiving room, he did say, we'll turn some stones over on Dalvin Cook. So it does sound like it's possible this could happen. Is there any line for you with Cook, or are you pretty vehemently against bringing him into the fold?
I mean, every player has a price. For me, with Dalvin Cook, like you said, $7 million, I wouldn't go near him at that price. I mean, maybe if it's $2-3 million, something like that, which he's not going to get because, he does deserve to have more value than that because of what he's accomplished. But I don't know. For me, I'm not super high in the value of running backs anyway. I like, we've talked about this in previous episodes. I think it's good that the Jets have had that cycle of drafting a late round or non-first round running back in every one of Joe Douglas's drafts so far. I think that's the way to do it. It's more affordable. You get guys who are younger, have more tread on their tires. Their best days are ahead of them. And that's what the Jets have done a good job of. So I like this room. I think there's more risk with adding Dalvin Cook than there is upside for me personally, just because of some of his issues in those areas that can really hurt your team, fumbles and drops and things like that, and his durability and his age. For me, there's too many red flags to be worth the risk, but that's just me.
All right, well, we'll come back to this take. I mean, it does sound like there's some smoke with the Dolphins.
I'm going to put it in my calendar right now. I'm going to put it like mid-November. Actually, when do the Jets play the Dolphins? In Black Friday. Let's put it at the end of December. Let's say check back on that Dalvin Cook take. I'm going to write it right now.
Okay, you can put Hopkins in there as well.
And
I mean, for other things from OTAs, there was an injury to CJ Uzomah this past week. It doesn't sound like it's too severe. We'll see. I mean, obviously, he has plenty of time to recover. Rodgers back on the field. I mean, how many times have you watched those highlights that they've released of Rodgers deep balls and Rodgers touchdowns? I think I probably watched the one deep ball he threw to, I don't know exactly who it was to, but the one deep ball they posted that looks like it went like 80 yards. I think I probably watched that upwards of 100 times. How about you?
Yeah, when they come up, I definitely give them a nice, probably 5 replays on average, but good quality replays, like slow motion. I want to see the mechanics, see the ball placement, the reactions of the people on the sideline. So, yeah, when I see them come across the timeline, it's a nice little gift.
The vibes are good. One thing that could mess with the vibes or could be nice for fans to get an inside look on how things are going and the change in culture is Hard Knocks. Here's I don't have anything to back this up, but here's my guess as to what's happening. Because last year Hard Knocks was announced in, I think, March. It's June. Still no announcement of Hard Knocks. The Jets are one of the 4 teams that the NFL can force to do Hard Knocks. And by far and away the most interesting team they could do. Not even just in those 4 teams they can force to do it. I mean, we're biased, obviously, but I would guess that the Jets are probably out of any team in the NFL kind of the most interesting storyline to watch during training camp, just in terms of bringing in Aaron Rodgers, all these young guys, the Zach Wilson angle. They have plenty of guys like Mekhi Becton and Denzel Mims. I mean, there's just a lot of characters on this team, and it's also, New York, big media market. The NFL can force it. Saleh, came out this week in a press conference and basically said, hey, look, there are plenty of teams that want to do Hard Knocks. We're not one of them. And that to me kind of sounded like him sending the message to the NFL. It kind of sounds like the Jets might be asked from the NFL, like, hey, we want you to do this, and they're kicking and screaming and don't want to do it, just more attention. There will be video clips tweeted out, more storylines talked about, more pressure put on this team. How do you feel about Hard Knocks? We've talked about it before on this podcast. As a fan, I kind of, I wouldn't hate it just because it's more Jets content to see. I know the Jets have a fantastic in-house media department that posts plenty of great content, but Hard Knocks gives a little bit more unrivaled access in terms of seeing the meeting rooms and, just different storylines throughout camp. So as a fan, selfishly, I wouldn't hate it, but I can understand from a player or coach's perspective and just from an organization perspective where this team is at, that they don't want to put that extra spotlight on them. How do you feel about Hard Knocks? Do you think it'll ultimately happen, or do you think if the Jets, just lock their doors and don't let the HBO crew in, they can't do it?
I have mixed feelings about it. I agree with what you said. I think from a fan perspective, there would be a lot of really cool content from it. And I know the Jets media team does a fantastic job. And I'm not just saying that because they put my quote in there, but they do.
They did muffle me.
That they did do that as well.
They took me out of the clip,
they lose some points for that. But I mean, they do a great job. Like, it is like the cinematography and the shots that they collect are all like really cool. Like, it's legitimately great. But I will say what Hard Knocks does have that they don't is that it'll be a little more unbiased. So I think you kind of get a more realistic look of what's going on, which I think would be cool. But I do understand, it's from a team perspective, there's no positive value to be seen in having, an outside camera crew coming in to your facility. So I understand their skepticism, and the history is there. I mean, yes, the Jets, the last time they were on, they did make the playoffs in 2010, but that is also the last time any team has done that. None of the Hard Knocks teams since that Jets team have won a playoff game. 3 have made it. None of them won a game. That Jets team was the last one to win a playoff game on Hard Knocks, and yeah, most of those teams aren't the best teams anyway, because of the criteria that's laid out. But regardless, that's not the best history to have on your side. So from a perspective of wanting to win games, I think it would be better to not have Hard Knocks. It's just feels like it would fuel kind of distraction that's not necessary. But at the same time, maybe the vibes of this team are good enough, and they have enough chemistry and just strong enough culture, and just everything's flowing nicely enough to avoid those distractions despite all that being there. So I don't know, there would be a lot of cool clips to come out of it for sure. But also I understand why they don't want it.
Yeah, I mean, I will say as a fan, I've gone back and watched that 2010 Hard Knocks probably at least 5 different times. So it is nice. And I keep saying it. It's like we don't know how the season will go. The vibes are immaculate right now. On paper, would you agree with this? This is maybe not a bold take, but I'm going to say on paper, before any injuries, this might be the best Jets team, at the very least, that I've ever seen. And, just with how the game evolves, maybe ever on paper. Now, we'll see how they perform. Guys can get injured. Guys can not live up to expectations. But when you just look at, Aaron Rodgers makes, the biggest difference. And this O-line isn't as good as those Rex years. And, the 98 team under Parcells is pretty great as well. But adding a Hall of Fame quarterback like Rodgers, having the young talent that the Jets do, like Sauce and Garrett Wilson. And I don't know. I think on paper, you can make an argument for this team. So I'm just trying to enjoy this summer. The vibes are immaculate before inevitably we get some same old Jets moments this season. We'll see. So to have Hard Knocks to kind of document this time, I don't know. It could be cool to look back on, but I get the pushback from it. Do you think? I'm putting you on the spot here, but on paper, where would you rank this Jets team? At least let's just limit it to the 2000s, because I don't know if we can speak for as well for the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, but 2000s, is this the best team on paper?
Well, look, I guess here's how I'd put it, because the Jets really haven't had, they've had good stretches in their history, but they've never had a truly dominant single season team. And the 68 team probably qualifies as that. But other than that, they've never won more than 12 games. The 98 team is the only one that's won 12 games. Other than that, 11 is the maximum. And you look at this Jets team, and you could, definitely see the talent to where they could win 13 games, or they can make that AFC Championship or Super Bowl push. So, frankly, the bar is not that high with the Jets. It's sad to say, but it's really not. So, it's hard to say because I mean, I don't really know for sure going into 68, like how did that look on paper? Because they were 8-5-1 the season before that. So I wasn't around then. I don't know what the expectations were going into that. And then 98, that was a great team as well, but it's hard to say like what did they appear to be going into that season, because this one right now, I mean, offensive rookie of the year, defensive rookie of the year, all pro defensive tackle, Hall of Fame quarterback. It's really not far fetched to say that it is potentially the best team on paper going into a season. Now we'll see if that's validated when they actually play the games, but the optimism is not. I don't think it's biased or reactionary to put this team up there as potentially one of the all-time most talented teams for the Jets.
Well, it's not a bad jumping off point for today's episode, because we're going to go over our predictions for this Jets offense and individual stats and team stats. And the Jets have not had a 4,000-yard passer since Joe Namath. I think Rodgers clears that, definitely if he plays 17 games. But even, and I was saying this to you before the podcast, when was the last time the Jets had a season where their starting quarterback, their planned starting quarterback, played every single game? Michael, can you provide the answer?
Well, my first guess was 2015 with Fitzpatrick, and technically he did play every single game, but you made the caveat not counting, leaving a game, most of a game due to injury, because Fitzpatrick left in that Raiders game and basically didn't play in that one. So counting that out, it's not since Mark Sanchez in 2011.
Yeah, it's been a long time. So there's a good chance, more likely than not, that we will see Zach Wilson or Tim Boyle out there this season. Hopefully not. We'll plan for getting all 17 games of Aaron Rodgers this season. But regardless, I think if he plays, 12 or 13 games, I think he's going to, well, maybe not 12 or 13. If he plays, what's the benchmark to clear 4,000 in your eyes? 14 games? Namath did in a 14-game season.
I mean, I want to throw numbers out there. So I pulled out my calculator, my computer here. Let's say he averages 260. How many games would it take him to get there? Saying 15.4. So at 15, if he misses a game or two, he can get to 4,000.
Okay. Well, I guess with that, Michael, let's get into our predictions. I guess we can start with Rodgers. We'll go through Rodgers, the running backs, the receivers, and the team stuff, but Rodgers is the most interesting. We did put a lot of work into this, not to just throw like random arbitrary numbers. We try to look at, his 2019, 20, and 2021 seasons under Hackett, kind of the distribution between receivers and running backs, their pass splits, kind of what we're expecting. Some of the other examples, you can look at the monster year that Tom Brady had when he went to Tampa Bay. I think there are a few things to consider here. One, this is a great defense. And I think when you have a great defense, more likely than not, the Jets are going to be playing in some games where they're going to have a lead and they're going to want to run the football. And on top of that, they have, assuming Breece Hall is able to get back to anything close to what he was last year, they're going to want to run the football regardless. So I think keeping those two things in mind, I don't think this is going to be Rodgers' best statistical season, but I think he's going to have a monster year. He has a lot to say in the plays that the Jets are going to call. There's going to be a number of series, including the 2-minute situations, where he's just going to be calling the plays. And so you imagine he's going to call his own number quite a bit. He's going to want to throw. He's got that fire in his eyes. The vibes are immaculate right now. He's looking for revenge. I think we're in store for a monster Aaron Rodgers season. So, Michael, I'll give you the ball first. What are you predicting for Rodgers in 2023?
Well, I laid this out in my predictions article I did recently, but I went off of his last 5 seasons. I think it's a good jumping off point to work off of, because you got 2 MVP seasons in there, so you have the ceiling. You have 2 of his worst seasons in 2022 and 2019, and you have a 2018 season that's pretty average by his standards. So, so including all those, I thought it was a good way to set a baseline right down the middle for him. And with that, and this is baseline down the middle for Aaron Rodgers. It's going to sound optimistic, but for the guy we're talking about, it's pretty normal for him. So I have him going 580 attempts for the season, 381 completed. That's 66% completion rate, 4,314 yards, 34 touchdowns, 6 interceptions.
Number of records there. How many yards did you give him again? That was
4,314.
So I think I'm a little higher on you on a lot of these, but not everything. Our completion percentages are the same. I gave him, Yeah, I looked at the numbers like you, and we looked at the pass splits versus the run splits, and I ended up with about giving him 32 attempts a game. I gave him 360 for 544, which comes out to 66% completion percentage like you, but I gave him a little bit higher in the yards, 4,400. And I gave him 36 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. And this is something that you talked about a lot. I'll jump around here, but in terms of the team stats and the potential for the Jets to be, among the league leaders in terms of turnovers, from an offensive perspective, in terms of Rodgers not turning the ball over and the rest of this Jets offense not turning the ball over. But historically, he's been a quarterback that throws very little interceptions. He will throw some interceptions. I think the one thing to keep in mind as well is the fumbles, because the Jets offensive tackle situation is probably the most questionable part about this offense. Rodgers isn't a guy who takes a lot of sacks. He throws the ball away, but I would imagine he's going to have, 2 or 3 fumbles in there as well. But this type of season, Michael, where do you think it gets the Jets? I mean, with the roster that they have and with the defense that they have, you can make the argument that Rodgers doesn't need to go scorched earth and have 48 touchdowns like he did in the COVID MVP year. But I have him at 36 touchdowns. You have him at 34 touchdowns. We both have him throwing for over 4,000 yards. Those would be both Jets records. How far does Rodgers need to carry this team by himself?
Well, you look at last year, and the bar was not that high for what the Jets needed out of their quarterback to not only be a playoff team, but potentially be a lot more than that. I mean, like, we went through all the stats right after the season, like how much of a quarterback away type of team they were in terms of them, like what happened in their losses. And many of their losses, they weren't blown out. They played great defense. They just didn't get the quarterback play. I mean, they lost 5 games last year where they gave up 20 points or fewer. So it's not as if they need a whole lot from their, at least based on last year, that they need a whole lot more to be a good team. But the question is, can they maintain the same exact thing they did last year? Because, if you just sub Rodgers right into last year's team, then yes, I think it is, easily a 12, 13 win team. But you have to maintain that. It's not always a guarantee you're just going to do the same thing the next year. And the Jets have a good chance of doing that defensively because they've retained pretty much the entire unit, at least most of its key contributors. Sheldon Rankins was a big loss, but other than that, everyone's back. So they do have a good chance of maintaining it, but can you stay as healthy? Can guys avoid regressing? A lot of question marks. But if they can be even close to what they were last year defensively, I think a season like the one we're predicting for Aaron Rodgers would easily net them 12 wins. I do think so.
Yeah, and in terms of the DVOA for the team stats, you and I both gave him top 5 in passing. I mean, I gave him 3rd, and you gave him 4th at DVOA. I have Rodgers averaging 12.3 yards of completion. I mean, I think that the chunk plays in this offense are going to be very prevalent because they have a running back like Breece Hall, because they want to run the ball. We'll get to Breece and the rest of the running backs in a second. But let's look at the receivers. Out of those 34 touchdowns he gave him, who's getting what? So I guess we can go through each receiver. That might be a little easier than going one at a time. But for Garrett Wilson, the obvious guy to look at here is Davante Adams. And the type of numbers that he put up in 2020 and 2021 with Rodgers were frankly video game-like. I think a lot of people are expecting Garrett to have a similar type of season. But, who's that second guy that Rodgers really leans on? I mean, I think a lot of people can argue for Allen Lazard, but, the Jets also have Corey Davis. They have Mecole Hardman, these tight ends. Rodgers likes to throw to the running back. So let's go through each guy and talk about receiving stats for each one. Let's start with Garrett Wilson. How did you come up with your numbers, and what ultimately do you project Garrett Wilson having?
So I think this is going to be a very Garrett Wilson-centric passing game. That's how it was when Davante Adams was in Green Bay. They didn't really have a second guy. It was Adams was the clear number 1, then a committee effort after him. And I think the Jets are built to do the same thing because they didn't go and get a number 2 guy like I think a lot of us wanted them to. It's going to be Garrett Wilson and then a committee approach. That's how I think it'll be. So I have him at the top here with 103 catches for 1,307 yards and 9 touchdowns. And he could go well beyond this to those Davante Adams heights, 1,500, 18 touchdowns. Totally. That's within reach for him. I think it is. But I just wanted to be a little more realistic and not shoot too high. And the fact that some people might consider this a low projection for Garrett Wilson is just a testament to how high his ceiling is. But yeah, I think that's a reasonable projection for him. And the way I came to that specifically is I don't think his targets are going to change much from last year because he already got a lot. 147. It was the sixth most among wide receivers. So I think he'll stay around that, but I just think the efficiency is going to be a lot better because he's getting significantly better quarterbacking. Last year, he caught well under 60% of his targets because the quarterbacking was so inaccurate. He was open on most of those targets. They were just bad throws. But with Aaron Rodgers, that will be turned around. So I think he'll get a similar, volume of targets, but he'll get more out of each of those.
Yeah, Devontae had 18 touchdowns in 2020, which obviously Rodgers had 48 touchdowns that year, so it's a little different for our numbers. But how likely is it that Wilson could approach that absolute video game like number where he's a guy who might be leading the league in touchdowns? I have him at 11 myself, so a little bit higher than you. But there is a possibility that it's Aaron Rodgers in a motivated year where he has a lot more control over the offense, and he has a guy in Wilson who, if can stay healthy, he's already proclaimed could be the best receiver in the NFL. So, I mean, obviously that's what did you give him, 9?
Yeah, I went with 9.
So double of what you gave him. But do you foresee that at all? If it is a very Garrett Wilson centric offense and they're force feeding him touches, is there any chance he puts up a Devontae Adams 2020 type season on the board?
He could. I definitely think it's possible. Devontae Adams is such a monster. Even Rodgers himself, when he was talking about Garrett potentially being the best in the league one day, he still stopped himself and said that he thinks Devontae is the best right now. So, he is the guy wide receiver, in my opinion. So, I just don't want to put Garrett Wilson up there quite yet until we see it, but it's definitely possible, especially if it is as, number one receiver centric as it could be.
I honestly thought I was being a little low with Garrett with 11. It's hard to predict injuries. That's part of the reason why these stats are not meaningless, because it gives you kind of a framework for what we're expecting. But none of this will be exact. But you're giving him 9, which would only be good for, I think, the 11th best in Jets single season history. I feel like with Aaron Rodgers, there's a good chance that Wilson himself could shatter a lot of records. The record for the Jets is 14 with Brandon Marshall. I mean, hell, I give him 11, and Decker's 12 in 2015 would still be above that. They've had 3 guys that hit 14. I kind of feel like Wilson, I know I gave him 11. I'm not going to change my numbers. Part of it's because I do think there's some of the other guys on this list that they can spread the ball out to. But I think there's a chance that Wilson will overshoot. We didn't want to be too optimistic on every single guy and just start praising everybody. But I do really think there's a chance that Wilson is the guy who really just leads this group and everybody else kind of lags behind. But the second guy on our list, Allen Lazard, has that chemistry with Aaron Rodgers, can be a threat in the red zone. You would imagine that Aaron's going to target Allen Lazard quite a bit. What stats did you give Allen Lazard? What are you projecting for Lazard? And I guess we can throw in Davis and Hartman as well. The rest of the receiving room behind Wilson, how do you kind of see their numbers shaking out?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, not to go into exceedingly great detail into every single guy, because we don't want to be here for 10 hours. But I think with I do think Lazard and Davis will be Conklin's going to be in that mix too. And I'll throw him in there as well. I think those 3 guys, and not that this is anything groundbreaking to say, but I think Lazard will be the second target behind Wilson, but I don't think Davis and Conklin will be too far behind. I think they'll be very similar, those 3 guys. So for Lazard, I have 54 catches for 707 yards, 5 touchdowns. Davis 42 for 515.3, and I have Conklin with 40 for 406. So I have Conklin being second in touchdowns. I think he'll have a pretty big role in the red zone. He showed that potential last year when he got opportunities, but he just didn't get many of them. So I think Hackett's going to see the potential for Conklin to be featured in the red zone a little more heavily. So I have Conklin second in touchdowns, despite being 4th in catches.
Yeah, I gave 5 touchdowns to Lazard, 3 to Davis, but I gave 4 to Mecole Hardman, and I kind of feel like he's going to be closer to Lazard than Corey Davis will. Not just injuries, but I just think that he brings something else to this Jets offense. He brings that gas that Robert Saleh has been talking about. And not only is it just the end arounds and even the little flip jet passes, which do count as passes for Aaron Rodgers' stats, But I think he's the guy they're going to look to on deep balls, which I know he did a little bit in Kansas City. That is the offense you'd want to do it in. But when I look at this receiver room, I think that Wilson's going to attract the most amount of attention. And so safeties are going to be playing over the top of Garrett Wilson quite a bit. And then you look at, okay, well, who's the next guy that Rodgers can really look for when he uncorks a long one? Obviously, he has the chemistry with Lazard, who has the size to go up and get some of those deep balls. Davis has done it himself in Tennessee and, when he's had some opportunities here in New York. But I think Hardman brings that second gear that none of these other guys do. And so I see 4 touchdowns for Hardman. And I feel like he's going to be right behind Lazard. There's even a chance that he could be, tell me if this is a bold prediction. I even think there's a chance that Hardman could be just behind Wilson, maybe not just behind, but behind Wilson, number 2 in the Jets receiving room in terms of yards and receptions and touchdowns. How do you feel about the possibility of Mecole Hardman perhaps playing a bigger role than we're expecting?
I do think it's pretty bold to say, just because of the contract difference with Lazard, or between Lazard and Hardman. I do think they view Lazard as a guy who's going to have a big role here, and Hardman is someone who will have a role, but maybe more of a confined one. I do think that is a bold prediction, but I don't think it's completely impossible because Saleh has been so specific in talking about Hardman and his route running potential and the Jets wanting to explore it. So the upside is there, and I don't think Lazard is enough of an established enough player to truly hold off other players for that number 2 role. If someone else like Hardman, who has a high ceiling and a lot of talent, breaks out and proves that they should be getting more targets. So I don't think this will happen. Like I said, I do think that is a bold prediction, but it's
the way you're saying is screaming strongly disagree, which I don't blame you. I guess in terms of volume,
I mean, I like I said, I think it's something that could happen. It's just, I wouldn't predict that to happen. You could say both simultaneously.
Yes, you really. How's that fence you're sitting on? I think Lazard.
I'm probably a permanent fence sitter. I like sitting on them. I'm not someone who takes sides unless it's Dalvin Cook, I guess.
Yeah, that's the only one you're willing to put your name on. I think volume-wise, it makes sense that Lazard, and maybe actually, I'm not going to say Davis. I think Lazard will probably beat him in terms of targets. You have to remember Hardman is going to get a lot of automatic manufactured touches. This is something you and I were talking about this week. Is what do we think this offense really looks like? Because Hackett used a lot of receiver screens with Devontae Adams in Green Bay. You can imagine that they'll try to use Garrett Wilson in that position quite a bit. We've seen his potential for after the catch playmaking, but anytime you're throwing a bubble screen or giving the ball and those manufactured touches to Garrett Wilson, you're risking injury. And Wilson's your best route runner. You don't want to lose him. So I think Hardman might be getting a lot of those manufactured touches. And I see him having big yardage potential because I think he's the guy they're going to go to on deep shots. So, in terms of targets, Lazard probably still beats him, but you're going to have plenty of manufactured touches for Hardman, and you're going to have the deep ball potential, which is going to, have the possibility for him to stack up yards and touchdowns. I guess that's kind of where my head's at. I think I might be higher on Hardman than others are. I just feel like you might see him have a breakout season. He's not a guy that, like you said, the contract difference would lean towards the Jets favoring Lazard and maybe even Davis, but I just think that he brings something else to this Jets offense. How do you kind of see them divvying up the manufactured touches between a guy like Garrett Wilson, who clearly has the after the catch ability, but not a guy you can risk losing, versus a guy like Hardman, who also has after the catch ability, also has that second gear, but isn't the same player that Garrett Wilson is?
Well, I did an article on this recently, and I think that we might see a lot more Garrett Wilson screens this year because the Packers threw a lot of screens to Devontae Adams when Hackett was there. Adams was 3rd among wide receivers in screens in each of the 3 seasons under Hackett. He averaged 21 screen passes a year. Garrett Wilson got 13 last year. That was only 15th among wide receivers. So I'm not talking an absurd increase. Like maybe, like I said, Garrett Wilson had 13 last year. Adams was averaging 21 a year. So maybe Garrett Wilson gets up to 19, 20 screen passes this year, about 1 a game or a little bit more than that. So I think that's something we could see. It was a big fixture for Adams. And then an added bonus of that is they worked a lot of fake screenplays off of that threat. You could see it on the film there. There was one play that was really cool I saw them do where they faked a bubble screen to Adams, and then he ran a slant off of that, and they threw it to Adams. And then they opened up other players by getting them to bite getting the defense to bite on the screen to Adams and throwing it behind them to someone else. So I think with Garrett Wilson, you could establish that type of threat and open up other things off of it. And he was just so good with Yak last year. I mean, he was second among receivers in missed tackles forced. Only Debo had more missed tackles forced after the catch than Garrett Wilson did. So you project that to the screen game, and I think it's really enticing. And I know I was talking about it with you, and you said, you could take some more hits from that, and that is definitely a reason to uh, not do that, because you don't want to put your number one receiver in positions where he has to take more hits. So I would understand why they might not do that, but I could see Garrett Wilson getting an uptick in those screens.
Well, I mean, if you get the ball in Garrett Wilson's hands, it's pretty much guaranteed yards. And the other thing to consider here is the receiver blocking that the Jets are going to be getting from Alan Lazard and Corey Davis. I mean, I do think screens will be a big part of this offense. I do think Garrett Wilson's going to get them. It's just, I think that they might lean towards giving Mecole Hardman a lot of them. As they get deeper into the season and into the playoffs, certainly Garrett Wilson will get plenty of them. But I think early on, you're going to see Hardman get a lot of those manufactured touches just because he's a little bit more expendable. And that's kind of my thought process as to why I gave Hardman more touchdowns than Davis and why I think he could potentially be behind Wilson and not Lazard in terms of yards and targets. But we'll see. I guess before we get to the tight ends, Randall Cobb, how much do you think he plays? I think we talked about it last week. But, is he a guy that you're seeing having much of an impact? Do you think he's playing a lot of those slot reps? I mean, I do think it's possible that he is Rodgers' buddy, and as the season goes on, injuries happen. He is a guy that Rodgers trusts. Are we seeing the Randall Cobb career renaissance, or do you think he's our Udonis Haslem?
No, I mean, I think he'll be out there and he'll play. I don't think he's going to be the Udonis Haslem on this team. But I also think he's not going to be, a guy who comes in here and just because of his name and his familiarity with Rodgers, he's going to be playing too big a role for what you would like him to be. Because I do see some fans who have been afraid, like, oh, we signed we signed Cobb, and now he's going to get this huge role that he doesn't deserve. I don't think that's going to happen. I think in my predictions, I have him getting 26 catches on 40 targets for 247 yards and 1 touchdown. So about 2 targets a game. I think he'll be out there. He'll get slot reps, especially if it's like, 3rd and long. Jets are running 11, or if they're running 10 personnel, 3 or 4 wide receivers out there. Obvious passing situation. I could see him in a lot of those. So I don't think he's going to play a ton of snaps or have a huge role, but I do think you'll see him occasionally sprinkled in there.
What about the tight ends? Obviously, Uzomah had been really the tight end that seemingly had been developing a lot of chemistry with Rodgers throughout OTAs. Obviously, they have training camp and preseason and the season to further develop chemistry, but Uzomah gets injured. We'll see what his status is like. It sounds like Ruckert has had a good spring as well. Conklin has been sitting out with an undisclosed injury, but he's presumably tight end number 1. How do you kind of see the tight end numbers shaking out? Do you think that Ruckert overtakes Uzomah as tight end number 2?
I do. That's what I have in my predictions. Like I said, I have Conklin 40 for 406. And I know the yards quickly on Conklin. I know my yards might be a little bit low for him. I don't necessarily think he's going to play worse. I just think he's going to make because last year he got a lot of dump offs in the flat. He's just picking up some of those little chunks of yards that didn't mean a whole lot. This year, I think because of how many other players are in the mix, he might get fewer yards. Catches might not go up that much, but I think he'll make more important catches. Like I said, his touchdowns will be up. I think he'll be bigger on 3rd down. So might not have the best stats in fantasy, but I think his impact will be better. But anyway, that's Conklin. But I do think Ruckert's gonna beat out Uzomah for the 2nd tight end spot. And I don't think he'll put up the biggest receiving numbers. I think it'll be mostly blocking. But I have him going for 20 catches, 200 yards, 2 touchdowns. So I think he'll get involved in there a little bit, but it'll be mostly blocking that props him up.
I think the thing that Uzomah really brings is the yards after catch ability from a tight end. I think out of the 3 of them, he's probably has the highest ceiling in terms of throwing those dump offs and those tight end screens. So I don't think he's going to be completely phased out. Also, not that this should matter too much, but it does seem like he has developed a kind of a close relationship with Rodgers since Rodgers has been here. So you'd imagine, I mean, look, Rodgers has gotten a lot of production out of Robert Tonyan and plenty of other tight ends who don't have the skill set that Uzomah has. And you saw what Uzomah was able to do in Cincinnati when he had, Joe Burrow, an elite quarterback, and other receivers taking away attention. I kind of think that that's the role Uzomah will play in this offense. Is I don't think he'll have a ton of targets, but the targets that he will have, I think, will be meaningful. And so I do think I gave him 2 touchdowns. I almost wanted to give him 3, but I gave him 2 touchdowns. I still had Conklin leading the pack with 4, and Ruckert, I gave him a touchdown as well. I think the thing that's really intriguing about Ruckert is his potential as a blocker. And because of that, he's going to be on the field a lot more. And you'd imagine that he'll be on the field in the red zone because of his chops as a blocker. How do you kind of see the Jets' red zone offense shaping up in terms of who they'll want to target the most? You'd imagine, not just passing. You'd imagine that Breece is probably the number one option in the red zone to churn out yards. But behind him, who do you kind of see getting a lot of those targets? And do you think in terms of the tight ends, yes, Conklin and Uzama are the typical tight ends you think of in terms of red zone targets, but Ruckert is the blocker out of the 3 of them. And that might mean he's on the field in those second and third and short situations, and he might be the guy who slips out and catches a few touchdowns like that this year. How do you kind of see the Jets' red zone offense playing out? Which, by the way, we should point out is an area that Hackett has had tremendous success in throughout his career. Even last year in Denver, they were 14th, which for the 32nd ranked offense is still pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, the gold zone, as Hackett called it, was his specialty in Green Bay, and they're generally very, very good in the red zone. And I think that'll be a hallmark of this offense. I think if there's going to be a weakness in this offense, it'll definitely start with the offensive line. So I think, maybe the tackles aren't amazing in pass protection, so maybe some drives stall earlier than you would like. And, at times the offense isn't quite as great between the 20s as some other offenses. But I think in the red zone, they're going to be really, really sharp. I think they're going to make their money with the red zone and not turning the ball over. I see them being elite in those 2 categories, and that's going to prop the offense up. But in the red zone, I think I see them spreading the ball around a lot in the red zone, and that's part of why I have Garrett going for only 9 touchdowns instead of a number in the double digits, because I think you're going to see them peppering these touchdowns around to a lot of different players. The running backs will be involved in the red zone for sure. In Hackett's 3 years with the Packers, their running backs average 6 touchdowns a year, 6 receiving touchdowns a year from the running back unit. So they're going to be involved. Speaking of that, I have Breece Hall going for 3 receiving touchdowns this year. Nothing crazy, but
who's behind?
I have 3 for Hall. I think Knight is going to follow him up in terms of both carries and targets.
Really?
And then
ahead of Abanikanda and Carter.
Should we save our running back talk for when we get to that?
No, we can throw it in here. I can throw it in here.
All right. Yeah. So I think Breece Hall is
receiving.
Receiving.
Yeah.
I think Breece Hall is going to lead the way. Then Knight, and then Carter and Izzy might get their little opportunities here or there, but I think they're going to spread the ball around the red zone. Like I said, I think I've Rodgers going for 34 touchdowns with no one hitting double digits. And I have 6 different guys getting at least 3 touchdowns, 7 getting multiple, and 10 or 11 guys scoring at least 1. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a group effort, and that's going to come down to Rodgers being able to his control in the offense, being able to check out of runs, be able to call things that maybe he's not force feeding one particular guy, but he sees, like you mentioned, Ruckert and the potential of maybe he's seen as a blocking tight end, and you have opportunities to slip him out and throw a score to him. I think that's something that with a quarterback like Rodgers is easier to execute, because you could trust him to get to the line and then make changes pre-snap. And then, like I said, running backs were a big part of the passing game with Green Bay. And then tight ends I don't think will be massive. Like, I don't think we're going to get an 11 touchdown season like Robert Tonyan had a few years ago, but I think as a group, I have them getting 9. I have 1 for Uzama, 2 for Ruckert, 6 for Conklin. And so, yeah, I think it'll be a group effort in the red zone.
Well, you mentioned the running backs. Let's just get into their rushing stats. We looked at the splits for the Packers under Hackett, and specifically we looked at 2020 because I think that was a good year to, obviously, their best offensive season under Hackett. And the way that they divvied it up between an MVP season that Rodgers was having and, a very competent running back group between Aaron Jones, Jamal Williams, and A.J. Dillon. Per game, Aaron Jones averaged about 14 carries a game. Jamal Williams averaged about 9, and A.J. Dillon averaged about 4. So with that in mind, Michael, how do we see the Jets divvying up the carries between the running backs? And then you kind of alluded to it earlier, but Knight behind Breece, ahead of Izzy and Carter, I think we differ a little bit there, but can you kind of explain your thought process behind Knight being RB2?
Yeah, I believe Knight's going to be the second running back, and here's why. I think it comes down to the passing game because you look at Michael Carter, and he's shown a lot of potential with his elusiveness in the run game, but passing game, and he also showed potential in the passing game as a rookie, but his blocking has really been a weakness. He's given up the most sacks among running backs over the past 2 years, 6 sacks. Um, his drop rate is pretty high, and he has never really brought you much in terms of route running. Both Knight, his blocking was pretty good last year. It was a small sample, but he looked solid. He gives you more size and potential as a blocker. And then in the passing game as a receiver, he was really effective on some of those catches in the flat. He was smooth catching the ball, turning up the field, and Rodgers loves those passes into the flat. So I think that's something Knight will feast on because, like, you look at those Mike White games, Mike White loved the flat, as we know, and Knight was really feasting on those. So yeah, I think Knight has the best passing game upside of those other three players, and also Israel Bandakanda. If you look at his college profile, his blocking was also weakness as well as drops, and he didn't produce a ton as a receiver either. So I think both Carter and Izzy have some passing game questions. Knight is more complete in that phase, so I think that's going to buy him more snaps, get him on the field, because like we just said with Rodgers, checking in and out of plays, like sometimes like any play could turn into a passing play if you have a quarterback who's going to be so in control like that. So you really need to be able to have a guy who could, maybe you were supposed to run into the flat, but Rodgers wants to check you into pass protection and pick up a blitz that he sees coming. You have to be ready to do that. So I think that's going to buy Zonovan Knight a lot more reps than both of those two guys. So in terms of our predictions, and we base this off of, what was it, the 2020 season, right?
Yeah.
How the Packers distributed their running back carries. So Aaron Jones was leading them with about 14 a game. Jamal Williams was second with 8. And then A.J. Dillon was third with, what did he have, 4? Like 4 or 5 a game?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was about their distribution. So I'm going to put Hall right around that Aaron Jones number. 14 a game. So I'll give him 238 over 17 games. I think he'll get 5 yards a carry, which would be an elite number. That would put him at 1,190 yards. I got 9 touchdowns for him. Nothing crazy, but a really strong number. Knight second. I have 7 carries a game, 4.4 yards per carry. Puts him at 119 for 524. I'll give him 3 touchdowns. Then I think Carter and Izzy will kind of go back and forth throughout the season. Maybe Carter starts out getting more than Izzy, but then over the course of the season, Carter maybe doesn't play too well because he struggled last year, so he has to bounce back from that. So maybe over the course of the season, Izzy takes over for him. So I have Carter 50 carries, Izzy 34, something like that. I think Hall and Knight, when everyone's healthy, are going to carry the load. That's how I see it. It could play out differently. Maybe the Jets see it differently than I do, but that's my personal outlook on it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think certainly based off draft position, Knight is the guy that you'd look at and think, okay, well, maybe he's the expendable one if they did bring in a Dalvin Cook or if somebody in preseason was really going off. But like you said, off of performance, Knight was significantly better than Carter was last year. I think there is a chance. I do think Carter makes the team, but I think there is a chance if there's a running back in preseason who's just going off. Do you think there's a chance that he doesn't make the team? Out of the 4 of them, he kind of seems like the most expendable just based off of the season that he had last year. And what really is his skill set at this point? Because I think as a rookie, we kind of felt like he was a guy who found a lot of hidden yardage, was able to make guys miss. And then that was not something that was part of his game at all last year. And like you said, he really struggled as a blocker. He struggled as a receiver. He struggled with the fumbles. So he's going to really need a good training camp, I think, to really solidify his spot on this team. I know it sounds crazy because he's a fan favorite. I really like Carter. I also think, and I made this point to you, maybe it's as ridiculous as it is, he's a well-liked guy in that locker room. Clearly, he's a guy who has a good sense of humor. Hackett is certainly a guy who I think buys into the vibes, and I can certainly see them being on the goal line and him being like, all right, MC, get in there. And Carter stacking, a few touchdowns every year. So we'll see, but I think that Carter needs a good training camp to really show the improvement. I had things a little differently, but I will say after hearing your arguments about the pass blocking and the third down potential that Knight is going to bring you, and especially fantastic point you just made, when you have a veteran quarterback like Rodgers who's going to want to be able to have the flexibility at the line of scrimmage to check running backs into pass protection or change a run into a pass. He's going to want guys that he's confident can do that. And Izzy is a rookie. The reason I had him is I had him second behind Brees in terms of yards. I mean, I had Brees at 230 for 1,200 and 9 touchdowns, so pretty similar to what you had him at. But I had Izzy with 490, averaging 4.9 yards a carry and 3 touchdowns. And I think the thought process for me is we learn this every single year, including with Knight last year, and look around the league at any sort of running back by committee. When you have a young running back who has juice, they play, especially as the season goes on. So I could see as the season starts off that maybe Knight and Carter are playing a lot more in September and October. But I certainly think as you get into November and December, having those fresh legs, you see what Izzy can bring just when you watch his film. He has that next level gear, and we'll see where Brees is at. But if Brees doesn't have the same explosion and same juice in his first year back from an ACL, I could see Izzy playing even earlier. But regardless, I think Izzy's going to get plenty of run, from week 10 onwards. And so that's why I have him behind Brees. After him, I did have Zonovan Knight. I had him at 250 and 2 touchdowns. Then I had Carter with 150 and a touchdown. What do you think about Carter? I think we were pretty high on him after his rookie year and thought that he could really kind of build on that. And then he had the sophomore slump. They traded away his best friend on the team, and Elijah Moore. What do you think his outlook is on this team? What does he really need to improve on to make a mark and bring something to this Jets offense?
Well, I agree with you that I wouldn't rule him out as a cut candidate. I don't think it's likely, but as a possibility, that might be definitely something to consider. Keep an eye on as a dark horse. I think it's definitely not impossible. But I think he's got to find a way to rediscover that elusiveness he had as a rookie, because as a rookie just felt like he was any first contact he was able to run through. If someone had an arm tackle out on him, he was going right through that. If someone was trying to tackle him in space, he'd get lower than them, truck through that, and get another 3 extra yards added on to the end of the run. He wasn't a home run hitter, but he was really good at turning those 0 to runs for no gain or runs for 2 yards into 4 to 6 yards to keep the offense ahead of schedule. But this year he wasn't breaking tackles quite the same way. I wonder if he wasn't even, I don't think anything has really been disclosed. He missed a couple games during the year, but maybe he wasn't healthy throughout the year because he just did not have the same elusiveness to short area quickness and toughness that he had.
He didn't have the same strength. I think that's really what
that's the best way to put it. And there are some examples. I actually did an article on him a few months ago, recapping his 2022 season, and I showed a few plays where he would have a good hole through the A gap, and then just a defensive tackle would peel off a block and barely touch him and get him down right in his tracks with no extra yards after contact. So, and that's not who he was as a rookie. So I think he's got to find a way to get back to finding those hidden yards, as you called them. I think that's a really good way to describe it. Get back to finding those, because he's never going to have that top end speed and be a guy who could take the top off a defense like Brees Hall can, like Abanikanda can. And then he's never going to be a huge all-around receiver in terms of routes. And his blocking is limited because of his size. So there are limitations there. But the thing that he did really well as a rookie was break tackles at a consistency that he led all running backs in missed tackles forced per touch as a rookie. So he's very good in that area. And it just wasn't there this year. So that's what he's got to get back to doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like if you're going to be a big running back, obviously that helps you in terms of pass blocking. So if you're going to be a short running back, you're going to be at a disadvantage when it comes to blocking. And it's like, okay, you can be a short running back as long as you're either a strong running back or a super fast running back. But you can't be a short running back who doesn't have that top end speed and then doesn't have the strength to back it up to fight through tackles. That's kind of what we saw from MC. He just looked small. He didn't look like he had the same strength. And I think that cost him a lot of the elusiveness. I also think he just lost confidence as the year went on. I think he, hit the ground running a lot as a rookie. Came in, had that good game against New England and just kind of built on it throughout every week. And then last year he had a tough game against Baltimore. He dropped the touchdown. I think he had a fumble as well. And he just never was really able to bounce back. We'll see. I mean, I think with Brees, you're hoping that he can just get back to, I had him averaging, the way I calculated it, I gave him about 5 yards a carry, which is really high. He had 5.8 though last year, granted, smaller sample size. and he's coming off an ACL. But as long as Brees is averaging, what would you say? What's the baseline in terms of a not disappointing Brees Hall? 4.5
Yeah,
yards
I
per
would say
carry?
that that's a good baseline. He's such a home run hitter. Like that's the key for yards per carry. The home run hitters are the guys who really excel in that category. Because you could have 180-yard run and get stuffed all the rest of the day and still have 5, 6. So he's a home run hitter. So if he can be at least 4.5 at the minimum, wouldn't be quite to last year's level, but that would be acceptable. And I have him landing at 5. I do think he's going to have a really efficient year.
How do you see the other non-running backs rushing in terms of, I guess, we talked about Mecole Hardman getting a lot of those manufactured touches. We have Aaron Rodgers. He's not a mobile QB per se, but he generally gets a few touchdowns every year. How do you kind of see the non-running back rushing looking?
Yeah, Hardman's interesting because like I was looking at his Chiefs numbers and they only gave him 5 rushes a year, which seems surprisingly low, but it's
The
probably
jet
because
passes.
yeah, like a lot of those jet passes that you get are, they count it as a pass, but it's technically a run. So probably had more than that in terms of what you would consider kind of a run extension of the run game. But I don't know. Well, a good point that you made because I have him predicted for 5 carries for 40 yards, but as you said, Barrios had 9 last year. So if Hardman's coming in to fill in for Barrios, it's easy to see him assuming those 9 carries. But maybe some more of those turn into screens or deep shots, things like that. But
Right.
maybe I'm a little low on 5, and maybe he takes that Barrios number of 9. What do you have?
Yeah, I mean, I had him at 8 for 75 and a touchdown. So,
Yeah, that's
I think,
realistic.
yeah, and I think, most of that is probably going to come from can he break a big one? But like you said, I think in Kansas City, a lot of it was those little touch passes that count as a pass, but are really a run. I'm fascinated to see how they use Hardman. I think he's one of those guys in the offense that I don't really know how they're going to use him, but I'm optimistic in terms of him finding a fit in this offense and Rodgers really kind of developing a chemistry. Just because anybody on this team and on an offense who just brings that level of speed, they're going to have to find a way to use him. And so I'm excited to see what they do with him. But yeah, I think 875 and a touchdown is realistic. Originally, I had it a little higher, then I was like, all right, I had to pull myself in a little bit. But in terms of the team DVOA stats, I mean, we revealed the passing. I had third, you had him at fourth. Rushing a little lower. You had him at 10th, and I had him at 11th, which for overall DVOA, you had him as 5th, and I had him as 4th. So the Jets' top 5 offensive DVOA, I don't know the highest they've, probably 2015. Let me look at what they were at in 2015. But kind of just, I guess, explain your thought process for the DVOA. You said to me you were more confident in this offense than you are the defense.
Well, I think for me, the reason I say that is because I think the defense has more room for regression, and the offense has nothing but room to improve. Because like the defense last year was 5th in DVOA, I believe, and they are bringing back the same crew as we said, and there are reasons to believe they can improve. Plenty of them. You look at the young defensive line, look at bringing Chuck Clark into the fold. And even maybe Sauce Gardner gets better and better because he's young. Maybe Michael Carter
Had some
II gets
interceptions.
better. So add some interceptions would be huge. And the fumble luck can improve. So there are reasons they can improve. Like I could see them
The
going up to
turnovers
number
are the
1.
biggest one.
That's the biggest one for sure. That would help a lot. 29th in takeaways last year, being as good as they were, is just crazy. I mean, couldn't fall on a fumble for anything, which is why they're doing those tennis ball drills. I don't know if anyone listening has seen that, but go check out the Jets Twitter account. They're doing these drills with the pass rushers where they're like bending the corner and like chasing after a tennis ball. Should help them recover more fumbles, hopefully. But yeah, so they could get better. They could be number 1 for sure. But I think what I lean towards is probably I think it's more likely they go a couple spots down than up just because of they were so healthy last year. I mean, pretty much no starter missed extended time on the whole defense. It was I don't have the facts for this in front of me right now, but I would be surprised if it wasn't the healthiest defense in the league. So they're due for a little bit of regression there this year, and just because of that, I think they're gonna drop a spot or two. Nothing huge, but this offense is. I mean, with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, sky's the limit. So I really do see this offense. I feel better about the offense being the offensive floor is lower than the defense. I'll say that. But in terms of can they be top 5, top 3 of 5? I do lean towards the offense over the defense, which might be a hot take, but like I said, because of the injuries regression that I'm expecting for the defense, that's the reason I feel that way.
Yeah, and DVOA is a lot of it is affected by the turnovers, and as we kind of covered,
Right.
and you have a great point about this. I'll just give it over to you. But in terms of yes, the Jets, obviously Zach Wilson and the quarterbacks struggle with turnovers, but the rest of the team, in terms of fumbles, it wasn't as bad as I originally thought it was. You have the numbers in front of you, but it was like they only had 3 fumbles from non-quarterbacks lost.
Yeah, only 3 lost fumbles from non-quarterbacks last year, so it wasn't bad, and they did get away with a few that they were able to get back on. But yeah, I think not turning the ball over is going to be a big strength. You look at Aaron Rodgers' interception numbers in his career, and it's just, for a Jets fan, it's wild to look at. I mean, look at these numbers: 4, 5, 4, 2. I mean, we saw a game where a guy had 6 interceptions, one game, and Aaron Rodgers is out here throwing.
I've seen multiple 4 interception games,
multiple 4 interceptions, and you've seen some of them in person.
Yeah.
2 of them. So I mean, I think that's going to be a huge strength that he's going to bring to this offense, something that the Jets have never been good at in my life, even average at. So it's gonna change a lot. I shouldn't say my life. Past second half of my life, past decade or so.
Jets fan life.
Jets fan life. So I think that'll be the strength, and he doesn't lose a lot of fumbles either. Probably about, I think he had 4 this past year, 0 the year before that. So usually he's like 3 or 4. So let's say he throws 6 picks. That's what I had for him. 3 fumbles. That's 9 right there. And then let's even go on the pessimistic side and say everyone else loses 6 fumbles versus the 3 they had last year. That's 15 turnovers.
Yeah.
That ties the number Detroit had last year to lead the league. So Jets very well could have a good chance of leading the league in fewest turnovers. And my prediction is that they will. Some of my predictions, I feel like I've been a little on the lower end in this one, but that would be my most optimistic prediction. I say they will lead the league in fewest turnovers.
What about sacks? This offensive line, and we're doing all these stat predictions, but it's hard to kind of fit the offensive line in there unless we're going to add up pancakes. I will say I think we're going to get over under 10 Mekhi Becton pancakes. Okay, I don't know how many games you can assume he plays, but
I'd say over. I think he can average more than 1 a game.
All right.
Like, he has to put the guy on the ground.
Yeah, it has to be a highlight. It has to be worthy of a Baldinger highlight.
Yeah, I think he can get like 20.
All right. Sacks?
Yeah, so I mean, sacks are. I always see sacks as a quarterback stat, not a reflection of the offensive line, because the offensive line is supposed to prevent the pressure. Then it's up to the quarterback. Are you going to throw the ball away? Are you going to force a pass? Or are you going to take a sack? And that is something that Aaron Rodgers has been pretty good at, is not taking a lot of sacks. 32 this past year, 30 2021, 20 in 2020, and 36 in 2019. So those are pretty low numbers when you consider that last year the average team in the league got sacked 41 times. The Jets were at 42 sacks, which was actually not that bad compared to the rest of the league. But that's because, like, Mike White played a good amount of the Jets passing reps, and Joe Flacco, and both those guys didn't get sacked a lot. It's not to say the offensive line played better for those guys. Mike White can attest to that. It's just that they were getting rid of the football, so they didn't get sacked a lot. So I think Rodgers is going to keep the sack numbers down. I don't know if I wrote down a sack prediction, but I think 35, something like that.
Yeah, you got 35.
Is what we'll see. Yeah, and
that would
last
be
year, that would tied for 9th fewest in the league last year. I think that makes sense, and that's not even to say the O-line will be the 9th best. It's just that Rodgers gets the ball out and knows how to avoid those sacks.
Are you more confident in this O-line in their pass blocking or their run blocking?
I think run blocking, because I know AVT is elite there. I know Becton is at least really good there if he's healthy and can be elite. The other guys are more of a question mark. You don't know what Tippmann's going to be as a rookie. Lakin can be not elite, but very good as a run blocker. He just has to bounce back to that. And then Dwayne Brown's probably, I like his pass blocking more than run blocking. But just because of Becton and AVT, I think as long as those two guys are healthy, it's hard not to like the run blocking of this unit, and I feel good about Tippmann, even as a rookie. And I think Tomlinson's going to bounce back with more stability at quarterback. So I would say run blocking, but the pass blocking can be good if things click.
All right, last thing, situational offense, red zone, third down. We already touched on the red zone a little bit, but third down for this team, I mean, having a veteran quarterback, you'd imagine that, with some of these guys in this offense, they can limit the amount of third and forevers that they're in this season. But how do you feel like this third down offense will perform and also the red zone, which has been a strength of Hackett?
Red zone, I think I'm going to go, I think I said third is the prediction I had. I feel good about the red zone, just, because of Hackett's experience calling plays there, doing it successfully. And Rodgers has been very, very good in the red zone, especially since he joined up with Hackett. So I think the red zone offense is going to be good. That's where I think good quarterback play really shines is, that's where the most points are on the line, where it's a difference between 7 and 3. Tight space, quick releases. Great quarterbacks really show up in the red zone, and I think we'll see that with Rodgers. Then third down, I think third down might be something where the Jets aren't quite as great as they are in other categories because, like I said, maybe sometimes the biggest potential weakness with this offense is probably the pass blocking. So I would say in third down, when you're facing obvious passing situations, middle of the field, between the 20s, maybe sometimes it breaks down a little bit, and they're not as consistent as at third downs as they are at some other things. So I'd say 12th for third down, so still above average, but just not quite as sharp as they might be at, ball security, red zone, things like that. Do you agree with that, or you have a little more optimism for the third down?
I mean, I think you raise a lot of good points. I mean, Rodgers is a guy who will take sacks on third down. He's not a guy who's going to force the ball.
And there's also the fact that another big third down weapon in the NFL right now is quarterback running.
Yes,
how much damage does Josh Allen do to the Jets on third down runs? And that's something that Rodgers earlier in his career was pretty good at. But at this point, he had less than 100 rushing yards last year. I don't think he's going to do as much anymore. So maybe that limits some on third down a little bit.
Yeah, the only thing I will say on third down is when you have a veteran quarterback like Rodgers, who's a fast processor and has the quick release, I think a lot of teams, especially teams in this division, love to blitz on third down. And right. I trust Rodgers beating the blitz quite a bit. So I think I'm a little higher on them.
Vic Fangio's coming in now.
Yeah, exactly. So Miami and New England love blitzing on third down. New England sometimes will disguise their blitzes a little bit more than Miami. We'll see about Buffalo. But I think on third down, I mean, this is the money down in the NFL. And I think I trust having a veteran quarterback like Rodgers. I certainly expect them to be better than last year, quite a low bar to clear. I could see them, if we have to be pessimistic on anything, because I think we're so high in terms of their red zone potential, their ability to limit turnovers. You look at the stats we just gave Rodgers, which, I don't think when you look at his career stats is anything crazy, but we're projecting a pretty good season for Rodgers and these running backs. I think third down is an opportunity, like you said, where, if Dwayne Brown, he's a 38-year-old offensive tackle, and Mekhi Becton, who is an oft-injured offensive tackle who pass blocking isn't necessarily his strength. He's also coming off of an injury and hasn't played in 2 years. So is there some potential for the Jets to eat some sacks on third down? Absolutely. But I also just trust having Rodgers in those money downs and those key situations. And we didn't really talk about this because it's hard to quantify, but I think the thing that Rodgers really is going to bring is, in terms of situational football, is those 2-minute drills. He's maybe the best in the NFL in terms of 2 minutes left to go in each half. He loves to call his own offense in those situations in terms of getting the Jets at least in the field goal range. I think he's going to be absolutely crucial there. And we'll do an episode about the defense pretty soon here, which will give us a better sense. But if the Jets are top 5 in offensive DVOA, I mean, we're predicting this team to go pretty far, I'd say. So let us know. Are we too optimistic? Should we be more realistic? Were we not optimistic enough? I mean, I guess we were. When you look at Rodgers having 48 touchdowns in 2020, Brady clearing 40 a number of times in Tampa Bay. Are we a little low? Maybe. I think probably not. I think if history's to tell us anything, we could take these numbers and then subtract about 5 from each category, and that's typically where the Jets end up. So we'll see. Let us know what you think. Comment below if you're watching on YouTube, or tweet us at CYJPod on Twitter. You can follow Michael at Michael _Nania, myself, Ben W. Blessington. Go to jetsxfactor.com, best place to go for Jets content. Please rate, review, subscribe on iTunes. Subscribe to the Jets X Factor YouTube. As I said, we were recording a number of interviews this week. We'll see when we release them, but you can expect at least one, maybe two, coming out this next week. Very excited for those to come out. We do have a few other episodes planned to get us through this dead period, and then before you know it, Mike, it'll be August 3rd. The Jets will be playing the Browns. We'll be doing game previews, and off we go. So I guess before we get out of here, Michael, any last thoughts, any last things to add on our statistical predictions and otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for these interviews coming up. And this time between now and training camp will fly by, I think. It's always the most quiet year of the football calendar, but it goes by quickly. Then training camp's here. Then we got the Hall of Fame game, so we're starting a little bit earlier this year, both camp and the preseason.
Zach Wilson preseason.
Zach Wilson's going to be showcased, and like we said earlier in this podcast, I think he's going to play. He's going to start a game at some point this year. Just hope. I want to say hopefully not. That's disrespectful of him. Actually, no. Hopefully not.
No, hopefully not.
Hopefully
yeah,
not.
We don't want to cheer for Rodgers to get hurt. It's just more likely than not. The Jets haven't had. 2011 was the last time.
Even you look around the league last year. I think it was 10 quarterbacks started every game for their team. So it's something that could happen. So hopefully he has a great preseason. And credit to Zach. I think he's had a good run so far this offseason. He's been very professional with the media. Had said all the right things. Seems like he's really soaking in the opportunity.
A few OTA highlights.
He's had some OTA highlights in there, and he's soaking up everything from Rodgers that he can. So we'll see what happens. Got to hope for the best. But on more important news, you and I were watching some old Jets highlights before we started recording this. Some instant classics like the 2012 Jets-Titans game on Monday Night Football, the 2016 Jets-Bills on Thursday Night Football, and I gotta say, those old uniforms, I defend the new uniforms. I like them more than most people, but there's a soft spot for those old uniforms. They look better to me now, maybe than they did at first. Maybe I didn't appreciate them.
Want to hear my conspiracy theory?
Sure.
Jets did not have a media day, which every other offseason they've had the media day at the end of OTAs or even at the beginning of OTAs. They have it sometime in June. The players have been released off into their summer break, so it's not going to happen until the beginning of training camp, you'd imagine. I think they're getting a throwback uni because I think they haven't announced it, so they want to have players do the media day. Some of them do it in the throwback uni. Some of them do it in the black, the green, the white. So I think a throwback uni is coming this year. Do you agree with me? That's the only explanation.
I agree. I think it's going to be here. It's just another explanation is we've seen a lot of old school gear from the staff. Both in the draft room, on the practice field, a lot of 80s logo hats thrown in the mix there, plain logo. So
so would that
the
mean
hints
that
are
they
there,
have
the breadcrumbs are there.
They can either slap the 80s logo on the current green helmet, or
right.
they have
That's
to
what I think
ditch
they would
the
do.
black. Okay, you think they do that?
I think they would, because you get 3 alternate helmet games a year, right? So you could keep your 3 black helmet games, and then you just slap the 80s logo on the regular helmet.
With a white face mask?
Yeah, and you could do that also. Because you can change the face mask, right? It's just the helmet shell. You only get 3. So I think that would be the workaround.
What game are they wearing that? Chiefs?
I think it might be one of those random home games at the end of the year. Houston,
what?
Washington, or I didn't.
They're gonna play either against the Texans or Commanders. They're gonna bring the 80s unis out for the Texans or Commanders.
Why did they wear the Titans uniforms
those teams didn't even
against
exist.
the Cardinals in 2008 or the Jaguars in 2011?
Okay, fair enough, but I don't know if they're gonna bring the 80s unis back. It's got to be against either the Dolphins. The Chiefs would work.
The Dolphins make a lot of sense. It's just Black Friday wearing black uniforms. How could you pass up on that?
Well, maybe it's a white uni. Maybe it's an away uni.
That's also true. Maybe Raiders. That could be like a classic looking game.
I think it's the
Sunday
Chiefs.
Night Football.
I think it's Sunday Night Football against the Chiefs. That's my prediction.
That could make sense.
I'll put it in. All right,
against a team that has an old school style uniform,
right?
Block numbers, block stripes. That's when it's going to look good. So maybe Chiefs is a good prediction.
Let us know what you guys think about these stat predictions. We'll have the defensive one coming out probably next week, maybe the week after that, depending on some of these interviews. Should we give them a clue about one of these interviews?
Well, this is a hint. This is definitely this one is a really obvious hint. If you can't get this, like you're just I don't know if you're a Jets fan. So one of these guys, his jersey number is the square root of one of his teammates' jersey number, and this teammate is 6'6". So let me recap in case I didn't lay that out smoothly enough.
They could also just hit minus, go back 15 seconds, but yeah.
6'6" Jets player. His jersey number, the square root of that is the jersey number of this player. Kind of went the other way with that one.
Okay. All
right.
Figured
it out. You all went to school.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that, but we'll see. All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Have a great week. We'll be back later this week. Go Jets.